very much, Dan. So appreciate everybody joining in this session. Looks like we got a good group. Peter, Deborah, Greg, Jean, Pat, Talitha are on, and Melvin's on. So just to kick it off again, the discussion questions focus around whether we agree or not with the proposed goals for appropriately utilizing the technologies, what would we change if we could, and what are some potential interim actions or milestones that might be key to achieving these goals. So listed as the goals in front of you: decentralizing clinical trials, using digital tools for clinical trial management, increasing local capacity for research innovation, collate efforts to frame new technologies, develop and deploy systems and tools to combine sources of data, incorporate patient input into research, and then advance analytics for recruitment and analysis. So with that, also to kick off, we'll need a group repertoire to report. Jean has done a great job with the last two. Anybody else want to step forward? Report out? Stick with consistency?
This is Talitha. I'm not volunteering. I'm just letting you know I have to leave in 7 minutes. I have a meeting. So okay. I'm sorry, but these breakout sessions have been really great. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Jean, you want to try to go 3 for 3?
Yeah, I'm happy to do it, no problem.
All right, great. All right, Talitha, I'm going to push you to kick off then. So any reaction to Dr. Califf's talk, kicking off the session?
I really am a strong proponent of using digital technology. I think it's very important. I've heard of this, and finally I see some of this coming to fruition in some of the studies. I would like to see somehow being able to save samples for the clouds and using that data in the future, but I'm not sure how we'll do that. We would have to save, have the patients or subjects include this in their consent form to be able to do that, especially like with some of the COVID clinical trials and some of the cancer trials.
Okay. All right, good. Other comments or thoughts from the group?
Greg, I was going to say, Rob's point that, he sort of, sort of pointedly said, these are not new technologies, these are technologies that most other, industries have adopted long ago. And why is this industry so lagging? There's this, to me, this sort of interesting thing that happens when you ask people, a lot of folks who do trials, industry organizations that do trials, and you ask them, why does it have to be so painful and slow and inefficient and so on? And they say, well, because the FDA makes us do it that way. And then you hear from leadership at FDA and they say, we're not saying that. And it is this strange sort of, O. Henry gift of the Magi story, where you have these sort of two people in relationship, each one of whom says, I thought that was what you wanted. I was trying to make you happy. And they both end up worse off. So I'm not sure how to get past that. There seems to be this sort of discommunication about, what really is, what do regulators really want or require? And because, it seems like there's talking past on that.
Hey, Greg, this is Jean.
Yeah.
That happened with, the question of what can industry pay for with, for patients. Same kind of question. Then the FDA came out with some guidance, with input from industry. So maybe it's an opportunity for the FDA to engage sponsors on their questions or myths or whatever's going on to put out some guidance here.
Yeah, I would just echo that on this. So I'll go to one of our nuisance points at Sarah Cannon, IND safety reports. And so they come out by the hundreds or thousands. We've had 2 great calls with the FDA about what they want. And they say, we've provided guidance to pharma not to mail those, but we absolutely can't tell them not to communicate whatever they want to communicate safety-wise to their sites. But we're not mandating it. We don't need all that information out there that people don't read and don't look at. Like, it gets caught up in the noise, right? There's so much paperwork, you miss the ones that might be relevant. But that's a place that goes back to what you both are saying, and Greg highlighted. there's this feeling of safety from pharma biotech to just mail all the paperwork, and the FDA is saying you don't really need to. I mean, we'll trust your judgment about what needs to be out there from a safety perspective.
Good, Pat, and I totally agree with that. I think that, when we develop trials, what does FDA really want to see? And I think that is unclear based on what the sponsors tell us. But the FDA can't really talk to us about a particular sponsor's protocol or what they agreed to or didn't agree to. But when patients with rare disease, especially in my role or in my world of pediatric rare diseases, you'd really like to know what you need to know versus what would be nice to know, because the nice to know stuff is very burdensome. And these are kids. And when these kids have to go through a series of 20 or so outcome measures and they're 5 years old, I'm not sure that you get a real world picture of how they function in their home. So I think decentralizing trials and getting some real world evidence and agreeing that that is sufficient for us to at least understand the benefits and risks of a given approach would be much more useful and less burdensome, and certainly more inclusive to patients with rare diseases. At this moment in gene therapy trials with 4 to 7-year-olds and a series of outcome measures that make them look like they're circus animals going through hoops is really unfortunate. And in addition to the fact that and granted, gene therapy trials have to be in expert centers, but then having the patient stay there for 3 months is just extraordinary in terms of a foreign environment for this kid, frequent blood draws, frequent this, frequent that. When if we were able to send them back to their environment, I think these trials could be more inclusive. And then I'll make one final comment on data sharing. Data sharing has to be shared, and it cannot be years later whenever we decide, because we are losing data that could contribute to our understanding of these, of the trajectory of these illnesses. And people are sitting on data, academics, for years until they decide they have time to publish, and sometimes companies as well. So I think we can do a lot better.
Very good. Well said. Other comments? Peter, did you have a comment?
The comment that I had is that Rob talked a lot about the digital infrastructure that we need, but there is a significant social redesign of the infrastructure that also needs to take place. And I think it's worth thinking about this digital transformation as a social and technical transformation that fundamentally flips the focus from doing research, enabling research by itself, to starting with the outcomes that we're trying to change, and then building the system, building all the components of the system that are going to be able to do that, including bringing people together to prioritize what's important to them and make decisions about what's important for research, what's important in practice, and how does it have to fit together. It sounds pie in the sky, but I think there are more and more examples today of where that's actually happening. And I wonder whether there's an opportunity to actually create a bit of a more connectedness around communities that actually are achieving this vision to accelerate them.
That was
thanks,
well
Peter.
said.
Craig?
I think that idea that, it's a little bit of a misnomer to call it the digital transformation, because the digital is done. It's the people who have to be transformed. It's the social and cultural transformation to catch up to the digital transformation that happened like 10 years ago.
Yep. Yeah, excellent point.
Could I make sure that I captured that right? So how I captured what you just said, Peter, is start with the outcomes that we want to change, of course, based on patient input, and then design data needs based on those outcomes. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
It produces a level of parsimony because we are judging what we want to collect, what systems we need based on what's most likely to actually achieve the outcome that we want.
Good. Okay. That's great. Other thoughts or comments? Helena, anything?
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the things is regarding the privacy issue. just making sure, especially, for companies that you run global trials, right? Making sure that not only the actual infrastructure be able to collect the data and make sure patients have access to the technology to collect, but how do you store that data long-term? How do you ensure privacy, and who is responsible, right? From the privacy perspective. And then the other thing is education, like while it may be similar to when we think about ICFs, like we want to make sure that the tools, and we have also the people to teach people how to use a tool properly, right? So if we don't have, even if it's digital and remote, if it's not used properly, we may not get the data, the quality that we want.
Okay, good. Anyone else? I want to make sure we go around on this one goal about incorporating patient input into research. So, I mean, we've got patients from a variety of backgrounds, including educational achievements and just their own awareness in terms of health and other issues. Any thoughts on how best to incorporate patient input into research, kind of going from, what's relevant to what's feasible for their participation?
So I could start. This is Jeannie. I'm with the Longevity Foundation. And I know, Pat, you probably have something to say along these lines. Hi, Pat. One thing that's really missing and what needs to change is there needs to be a negative zero phase in clinical trials where it's planned for, and lead sites, their communities are asked about the study question, the study implementation, and the study feasibility. And those community advisory boards must happen at the sites where the study is being implemented. What happens now is that largely sponsors ask a pile of patients or caregivers who are not affiliated with the trial, nor would they be targeted to participate. So there's largely, from a process standpoint, patient engagement needs to happen in advance of the trial at the sites where the study is being implemented. And that's a major change that needs to take place.
Good. Pat, did you want to add to that?
Sure, I agree with that. We have in the rare disease arena have formed community advisory boards locally so that they can be instructive or help to be instructive in clinical trial design and operations. But we've done a series of preference studies, and I think we have about 12 publications now, really to look at patient preferences using different methodologies. And I think this is really important because in doing the preference studies, you can engage a much broader or wider group of patients than you can who are eligible for these trials, who may not, who may not have perhaps resources or employers who are really in tune with the idea of a patient or a caregiver being absent for a period of time. And I think they provide incredible insight for sponsors developing clinical trials to have these preference studies so that they can get a feel for the wider population and how they can be more inclusive.
Other thoughts? Okay. Interesting. And then any thoughts around analytics for recruitment and analyses? One of the things we've done is trying to bring our electronic medical record into our informatics database, for lack of a better term, so that we can get a sense of the types of patients that are at different sites and some of the tie into mutations, really trying to think about alerting their physicians that there might be a trial that's appropriate for the patient. We haven't taken that to direct to patients in the cancer arena, but we've been trying to do that to make our physicians aware. But I imagine in other disease arenas, it might make sense to even take it to the patient. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, so we formed a registry in 2007, really to figure out, really to collect patient PRO data, right? Patient related outcome data. And we formed this after a steering committee of patients and academics and et cetera to really design what is the information we wish to collect and how do we wish to collect it and how frequently do we wish to collect it. So we developed 12 different modules because the disease that I represent, Duchenne muscular dystrophy, is a progressive debilitating disease. So children young are, for instance, are very functional. Children maybe 9 to 13 years old are losing ambulation. In their later teens, they're unable to move their arms, and in mean age of death is in the late 20s. So we wanted to make sure that we were really comprehensively looking at this population. We have 5,000 patients in that database. As we looked at the technology behind that registry, we felt that the technology was old, and I'm certainly not a tech person, so I would totally fail if you asked me a detailed question. But I will say to you that we felt like we should be able to do several things. One is integrate the patient's health electronic medical record. Could we somehow, some way, figure out a way to sync that information? In syncing the information, could we go to our academic centers and create a doc flow sheet? Because as we know, when physicians enter data, they enter it in all sorts of different language, and some of the questions, depending on if they're Epic or Cerner, they might be in different, so it's hard to integrate all that data. So we wanted to create a doc flow sheet, so at least the important bits that we wanted to collect were in that data doc flow sheet. So we then decided to move into different technologies. So we now have incorporated a new backbone technology, 2 of them actually. One is called Prometheus. Prometheus has the ability to reach in with the patient's consent. So we have Thread technology, which is an app on a phone or a computer where the patient can do patient-entered data. Once they consent, the second or the other technology called Prometheus, once they do the consent and are structured through that, they can go and get their electronic medical records. This helps in a variety of ways so that should they be in a rural area, the emergency room docs can access their health records and their PRO records, et cetera. But for the sponsors, we call this the Duchenne Research Interchange, where if a sponsor wants to contribute the post-marketing data, we can again, with the patient's permission, really drive all of that data, the EHR record into and the PRO data into their data, and they can do some analysis on that, and it's proprietary to them. But it all, then the de-identified data can go into a hub. So I think that there are ways to use technology that really enable and enhance the patient opportunity, create opportunities to understand real world evidence and how this particular intervention is working in this particular patient in his or her environment. So I think the use of digital technologies is really quite remarkable these days, but I think it requires a lot of people time to make sure that the data is the same in terms of being able to integrate the same question in the same way so that the data is pretty secure and pretty rigorous. So we are exploring that and we now have 2 post-marketing studies going on where the sponsor has access to their own separate data. And publishing and all of that, so we're not seeing it. So I think that these technologies certainly can be, it can involve and be very integrated in terms of the patient experience.
And one thing I want to add to that, just a little shout out to UT Southwestern, the cancer center there. What they do is they have the patient as part of, their My Chart, the way that they come into the health center, they have them opt in for research. Just broadly, I'm opting in for research. And that allows, that consent allows the process to do the following. When there's a clinical trial, the analytics go out through the EHR to see whether or not the patient accepted that opt-in for research. And patients are flagged who opted in for research. And at the time of the study visit, the treatment discussion with the patient is offered a clinical trial. So it's a process that is integrated into care. And it already has the patient already opted in for research. And basically they're saying any research study that goes on at UT Southwestern that you think I should be a part of or offered, I want to know about it. And that the process goes from there. So
Yeah.
We know that
It's
the
interesting.
Yeah, we had that option too, but we didn't want it in an academic center because we think academic centers are often biased to their own trials, for instance, rather than a broad range of trials that may be occurring in the space. So we work with sponsors, and we can target outreach through the EHR and the PRO and say, there's a trial based on your mutation and age and XYZ that you might be interested in. Please contact, whoever. So, and we can then subset it into a nearby, should there be a nearby clinical site, the patient, we can say, this is happening at a site in Kansas City. You live within 100, I think our radius is 200 miles radius. So we can say within a 200-mile radius, there's a clinical trial that fits your particular characteristics. So I think digitization is really important.
Good. Other comments from the group? Carolyn?
I wanted to ask Jeannie if she had any data on that process that you described at UT Southwestern is very smooth and slick.
Yeah.
And when it works, I imagine it works beautifully.
It does.
But I am struck by how that may trigger exactly the sorts of disparities and lack of trust in the system amongst the populations that we're trying to increase.
I can tell you that UT Southwestern, because I interviewed them, and there was a paper that was published in JOP as a result of their interview and work, that they're able to recruit 30 to 40% racial ethnic minorities in all their cancer clinical trials. So they have a intensive and longstanding community outreach relationship. So what I just said is not successful unless you have all those capabilities, right? And infrastructure.
Right. It's the whole community engagement.
The whole thing.
All
This
the
is
human
just,
pieces.
this is, Simon Craddock-Lee, he's your guy if you want to talk to him about what he's done down there.
Good. Other comments? Peter, anything to add there?
No.
Hey, Howard, this is Melvin. We have about a couple minutes left.
Okay, good. All right, good. And then, any comments on unique digital tools for either clinical trial management or combining information? I know some of the things we've done from a digital strategy is some investments in natural language processing to try to simplify pathology reports, radiology reports into usable data. And that's actually been sort of a neat technology. The artificial intelligence hasn't been as overwhelming as I thought it might be, but there's been some places where that really has paid off. Any thoughts from the group on digital tools or digital synchronization strategies that have played out to mention for the broader group?
I think one thing you can do is to look through your study, what you're collecting, and sort of divide it into what you can get passively from the EHR, what you need in a patient participation, and what you need to actually from in a centralized manner. So we've done that. And then part two is when you start the study, there's some things, even a sort of a pre-screen manner, you can go to the EHR. As been mentioned, let investigators say, hey, about 20% of your patients meet this criteria. And also feeding back to the study design, right? Sometimes you can actually use the data to figure out if your study design would not be able to allow the study to be recruited or timelines. So thinking through what you actually need in-person collection, what you can do virtually, and then things that, the iPhone where you collect steps or heart rate and blood pressure cannot be added instead of in-person visit as some ways that we've thought about using these tools.
Good. Others? Anything else digital-wise, systems-wise to mention? Okay. Any last thoughts going around the table? Deborah? Helena, anything? All right, good. Well, I appreciate the discussion. I think we just got a few seconds here before we're going to go back to the other group, but appreciate everybody's conversation and participation. And Jean, thanks for reporting out and doing such a great job with that.
Sure.